told you I'm going to say so. Go on. Okay. Yeah, take 11 minutes. Go ahead, sir. Oh, we do have. Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Gordon Edwards of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, and I'm here to talk about nuclear waste and the fact that the age of nuclear waste is upon us now, and that nuclear waste is everybody's business. You will be hearing from Dr. Ole Hendrickson about a hearing that is coming up in 2 days' time in Pembroke, Ontario, that has a lot to do with nuclear waste, both coming and going. And then we will be hearing from Mr. Doug Hunter from the Inverhuron Committee, which is from the area around where OPG wants to bury and abandon its most voluminous nuclear waste, which is the low and intermediate level waste, right by the shore of Lake Huron, a very controversial issue. And we'll be winding up with Mr. John Bennett, who is the National Program Director of the Sierra Club Foundation of Canada. Basically, the problem is this. Up until recently, nuclear energy has pretty well managed itself. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has assisted the nuclear industry to build things according to regulations. And basically, the attitude of the CNSC is that if the industry wants to do something, it's fine as long as they meet the regulations. The problem is that sometimes things which are acceptable to the industry are not acceptable to the population at large. And so we have a kind of a conflict of wills. Which will is going to prevail? The will of the nuclear industry, which wishes to have the convenience of doing what is easiest for them to do, or the will of the population that is affected. And that's really where the future is going to be taking us. So one purpose of the press conference today is to alert Canadians and their elected officials that it's time to stop riding at the back of the bus. It's time to go up to the front of the bus and realize that you've got to take a hand in making sure that this bus is going in the right direction and that it's taking the right turns, because the consequences of failure are very, very long-lived indeed. In fact, when Canada was confronted with the possibility of the United States building a waste repository in Vermont, right close to the Quebec border, the Canadian government actually sent a protest note through its ambassador in Washington saying that Canada would not look kindly on seeing nuclear waste planted right beside water bodies that are flowing into Canada. Well, now we are in the position of trying to manage our nuclear waste in ways which are not always acceptable to Canadians or to Americans, although convenient for the nuclear industry. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. In the town of Pembroke, Ontario, we have a classic example. The graphic here illustrates the problem. The problem is that there's one nuclear waste material which is a hazard for both workers and the environment and the population living around nuclear reactors. It's called tritium. Tritium is radioactive hydrogen. In order to limit this problem, the Ontario Power Generation built a tritium removal plant where they remove the tritium from the heavy water, and this sequesters the tritium, and they store it, according to their own website, they store it safely as a nuclear waste product. However, there is as you will hear, there is a company in Pembroke, Ontario, which is actually purchasing this radioactive material which has been sequestered, and they are shipping it around the world and contaminating the local environment while they do it. So this is the problem with nuclear waste. We don't know how to get rid of them. We only know how to move it from one place to another. And if that place happens to be your place, you might not be very happy with it. Dr. Ole Hendrickson.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm here representing the concerned citizens of Renfrew County. It's a small group based in Pembroke, Ontario, where the SRB Technologies Tritium Light Factory is located. Our group has intervened at hearings about this facility since before it opened in 1990. So we're very familiar with this issue. And for the first 5 years of SRB's operations, they were taking tritium from the Darlington Tritium Recovery Facility and filling tubes. But in 1994, they applied to become also a tritium waste facility. And in doing so, they got an increase in their allowable radioactive gas emissions so that they could operate a tritium recycling operation, and they began to import tritium wastes from all over the world that were in expired exit signs, for example. They would take the glow-in-the-dark glass tubes out of the exit signs, put them in a recycle unit, crush them, and capture some of the radioactive gas. But a lot of it went out the stacks. And as a result, this continued for 10 years, and the environment in Pembroke, from quite a wide area around the facility, is contaminated now. The groundwater, the vegetation, the soil. But in preparation for Thursday's hearing, we've learned some other disturbing things about SRB technologies. There is a nuclear weapons connection because tritium in very small quantities is vital for maintaining nuclear arsenals. The fusion reaction of tritium can boost the yield of a nuclear fission weapon that has plutonium or enriched uranium. So it's extremely important to keep careful control on tritium and its import-export movement around the world. And we were shocked to learn that this Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission is proposing to lift the safeguards provisions from SRBT's license and also remove the reference to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And we simply cannot understand why the CNSC would contemplate doing that. A second thing that makes this bigger than just a little local issue is that SRB is continuing to import large quantities of waste exit signs and other devices from around the world. But we are unable to get much detail on this because the CNSC refuses to provide any import and export permits to document these import and export activities. Whereas the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the US has released its export permit for SRB technologies, and we know they have a valid permit. Their affiliate in North Carolina to bring in large quantities of waste exit signs. It's valid until 2018. And yet, in this hearing on Thursday, there is not a single mention of SRBT's waste activities. So this is why we're anxious to bring these kinds of issues to a wider attention. These have implications not for just Canadians, but for people around the world. Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Doug Hunter. I'm representing the Inter-Hearing Committee, which is a committee of local residents that are just 2 kilometers from the proposed site for the deep geological repository. It's being proposed by OPG, and in the that's going to be situated 1 kilometer from the shore of Lake Huron. And I speak as my family's had a residence there for the past 80 years, and I speak as a parent and a grandparent who would like to see it preserved for future generations. But more than just myself, I'd like to see it preserved for the 6 million people that use it currently as drinking water, use the Great Lakes Basin. The concern I have in this is that, and I don't want to take away, there's a lot of smart people that have looked at this, but there's risk attached to it. And everybody can talk about what the risks are. And when you propose risk in a project, the risks are not worth it when it's located that close to the Great Lakes. And I'll give you an example. So I think it was 15,000 years ago, the area that is proposed for the deep geological repository was actually flooded. Totally flooded. The whole area was underwater. So what happens, who can predict with the age of climate change what's going to happen? This radioactivity has a half-life of 100,000 years. So who's going to predict in the future what could happen to that? Could it flood over again? And then what happens to the repository that's sealed off? And what protects it? What keeps it from drifting into the bedrock and into the water source for the populations that are living there at that point in time? So I tend to feel that it's a decision that should not be made by just a local community. It should be something that involves all the participants in the Great Lakes area. And in fact, there's been 20 million communities have passed resolutions around all of the Great Lakes that represent 20 million people that have passed resolutions opposing this DGR where it is. So cities including Toronto, Hamilton, London, Chicago, etc. So I think there's great reasons why this thing should be looked at from a social acceptance point of view. Thank you. I'll pass it over to John Bennett.
Good morning, John Bennett from Sierra Club Canada Foundation. Last week, the panel, environmental assessment panel, recommended to the Minister of Environment to approve the plan by Ontario Power Generation to construct a geological repository for low and intermediate level radioactive waste at the Bruce. That requires transporting hundreds of tons of material from Pickering, the Pickering nuclear station and the Darlington nuclear station through the most highly populated area in Canada to Lake Huron. We raised several issues about the security of moving that radioactive material, all of which was ignored by the panel. The report from this panel reads like a public relations document for the nuclear industry. This is probably a clear indication of just what the changes to the Environmental Assessment Act brought on by the present government in 2012 have resulted in. They've turned environmental assessment processes into public relations exercises for industry. I would just like you to imagine one possible scenario. Imagine that a truck carrying 10 tons of radioactive material pulls out of Darlington on its way to the Bruce. It's a three or four hour drive. What if somewhere along the line that truck is hijacked and driven into downtown Toronto and parked on Bay Street, and someone throws in 100 pounds of explosives, takes off the lid, and sets off an explosion? Now, I'm sure the radioactive experts would say, well, it's just low-level radioactivity. It's not going to kill millions of people. What it is going to do is going to create an incredible panic in downtown Toronto, in the heart of the country's financial district. This is a scenario that's easily done. These trucks are not guarded. No one will know it's missing until it doesn't arrive 6 or 7 hours later. Yet, when we put that scenario to the panel, it was absolutely ignored because no one would want to do that. But I think we've seen enough examples around the world that someone may want to do that, and it's easily done. We need to keep the radioactive waste where it is now until we find a solution for it permanently, and one in which involves not making any more. So we strongly oppose the federal government approving this project and are asking the government of Ontario to tell OPG, which it still owns, not to go ahead with this project. Thank you very much. Questions?
I guess I'm just wondering what you would propose as an alternative. I mean, this waste is sitting at these facilities as it is. It needs to go somewhere, I would assume.
Why? These facilities are not small. These facilities are secure. They're surrounded by fences and armed guards. They're in concrete storage areas. They're there, and it's secure. By moving it, they're actually reducing the security. And the place they've chosen to move it is one of convenience, not of scientific decision. It's in a community that's dominated by the employees of Bruce Power, so the local municipality supported it so that they could say that they were invited. But it's really just a convenient decision. It has nothing to do with finding a proper location for this. And it has nothing to do with how safe it is where it is now. Those facilities can still store a tremendous amount of material, but the ultimate question is we got to stop making this material. There are better ways to meet our energy needs than risking future generations. Sure, go ahead.
Just to add to that, the panel is, while talking about putting this stuff underground, they're talking about refurbishing these reactors to produce a whole lot more for 30 or 40 years to come. So this is not getting rid of the problem, it's perpetuating the problem. And in fact, putting it underground is perhaps the industry's way of making it seem more acceptable that they're continuing to produce it. The main bottom line for many of the people on the Great Lakes is you don't dump your waste where you draw your drinking water. And the important thing about the below ground is that the only purpose for really putting it below ground is so that it can be abandoned at some future time. And in fact, that's phase 4 of the project, it's abandonment. And so it's really to give them a way of backing off and leaving it there forever. And this really galls people. They say a temporary storage while it's being well looked after and well managed with professional equipment and everything, that's one thing. Just backing off and abandoning it, that's something else. So there's really those two aspects of it. The location, who in their right mind would choose that location if you were just starting from scratch? The reason why that location is there is because nuclear reactors need a lot of water to keep operating, which is exactly the opposite for nuclear waste. You don't want to have a lot of water near where nuclear waste is. So it's not the right site for nuclear waste. It's only the right site perhaps from the